Welcome to Broad Eye, the podcast that explores knowledge gaps in ophthalmology and eye care. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Broad Eye podcast. My name is Sean Maloney, and today I have a guest I'm very excited to talk to. His name is Jim Thoune. Jim is a three-time U.S. blind chess champion, among other things. So, Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. I expect we're going to be doing lots of talking back and forth because I know both of us have been accused by people in our lives of being talkative individuals. So I think it'll make for a good conversation. Yeah. So I was hoping maybe we could just kick it off. Introduce you as a blind chess champion, but maybe you could just tell the initial story of how you lost your eyesight and also how that affected your family and if they had any experience with that before.
Sure. I'm 70. I've been blind actually for 65 of those years. I was born, it wasn't discovered immediately, but about 6 months after I was born, it discovered that I had the retinoblastoma tumor on not just one, but both optic nerves. I think it was the left eye activated shortly before my second birthday, lost that eye. And at that time, and this would be back in 1952, 53 timeframe, the conventional wisdom was that if I made it past age 6 without the tumor activating, that odds were fairly good that it would go away, atrophy, and basically disappear. I made it almost to my 5th birthday, so didn't miss by much. But kids are resilient, and my feeling is now and has always been that if there was a good time to lose my vision, I picked the best. I had nearly 5 years of vision, very good vision in one eye for most of those years. And I'm one of those who can remember things actually dating back to previous to my second birthday. I have a very clear memory of a Christmas, the Christmas tree, the decorations. One of the boxes under the tree was a box of little, I don't know if they were called match cars back then, but that's generally what they're referred to now. And our puppy, Puddles, was a little kind of black, gray, and white spotted creature, had bestowed his opinion on my box of match cars.
That's a nice way to put it.
Yeah. But how did it affect me? How did it affect my family?
I would have to say you had a family member that had some experience with this. Like when we talked a few weeks back, I think that you had mentioned something along those lines, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're quite right. The retinoblastoma had been, nobody had been aware of it prior to my mother's mother. She wound up having it in one eye, lost one eye to it, and my mother actually lost one eye to it. The other part of it was that she had one sibling, her youngest brother. She was the second oldest of 7 kids. Her youngest brother actually lost both eyes to retinoblastoma, and her youngest sister was born premature and suffered the RLF, retrolental fibroplasia, I think it's called, too much oxygen in the incubator. And so she was also totally blind. So blindness was, we'll say, common in my mother's side of the family. And her parents, her dad was confirmed alcoholic. Her mom was probably also German-Irish family. In today's standards, they probably both would have been in jail and lost their kids to Child Protective Services because they were a corporal family. and kids did what the kids did. They were made to interact and be active. So my uncle, who was totally blind, was taking himself down to Deep River in his teens and taking himself fishing um, by himself. I assumed that on occasion, at least, maybe one or two of his brothers went with him, but he was an avid fisher person, and he went by himself from the house several blocks down to the river and came back home. Did he even use a cane? I couldn't swear to it. I remember when he got his first guide dog. I was probably 6, somewhere around there. Both he and his sister went 150 miles away to school, to the Indiana School for the Blind. And basically, I kind of followed a similar path. Didn't have a river to walk to per se, but there was a fairly large pond that we walked to on a regular basis. And I remember sneaking out the window of my bedroom at night and taking myself fishing, and just making sure I got home before the parents woke up. The blindness wasn't a factor, except that it meant I went away to school when I was just shy of my 6th birthday. I also went to the Indiana School for the Blind, and that was just the reality of it. I didn't carry a cane until I got ready to go to college, and was all over my neighborhood. We rode, we had a two-wheel bike that my brother and sister and I shared. Their stepbrother and stepsister. We shared it. I rode it almost as much as they did by myself.
You rode this totally blind, the bicycle?
Yes.
Yep. Wow. That's I don't know if it that's impressive.
I was taught to iron and vacuum. We were doing house chores before our 10th birthdays, and Mom's idea was basically you help with the housework, you help with the yard chores, if you have any aspirations of sitting down to the dinner table. And that was just, that was the nature of the family. And I made years later, I would make a Toastmasters speech. I was a member of Toastmasters International for about 10 years. I made a speech titled "Thanks, Guys," and it was basically a thank you soliloquy to my parents for letting me be. I said letting. I should probably say making me be as independent as I could live through. Climbing trees, I mentioned riding bicycles, roller skating. I was not only was I not encouraged, I was not allowed to sit in the bedroom and listen to the radio, which was what a lot of blind kids did. The kids that I knew and interacted with at the School for the Blind, that was not allowed in our family. So
sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but just did any of these activities as a kid, I mean, kids who are fully sighted, when they climb trees and ride bikes and these things, end up with injuries. I can imagine somebody with no sight that there must have been some stories there. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have any stories and you want to touch on any of those before we dive into your chess life.
Well, I learned what it feels like to be charging down the sidewalk, pushing one of those little Tonka trucks, having the axle break because I leaned too much weight on the truck, and skidding on my elbows on the sidewalk. Huge raspberries on elbows were commonplace. running into a car, had several chipped teeth because the car was harder than I was.
I'm
Fingers
laughing, but I'm
slammed
not.
in the
I'm not. I can
doors.
laugh
Just
now, right? Because this
yeah,
is 60 years ago, and you're here to tell the story. I mean, obviously, it wouldn't have been that funny at that time.
but like I said before, kids are resilient, and I there's a whole nother soapbox I could get on. We'll talk about the protectiveness of children these days, and I understand that it's a different world. The risks from other two-footed creatures is much greater now than it was when I was being a kid in single digits and even into to my teens. But um, if I fell over something, fell off of something, if I was bleeding, yeah, we cleaned it up and put a Band-Aid on it. Um, eggs on the forehead were just they're commonplace.
Par for the
And
course. Yeah.
I freak people out now because I walk quickly. Maybe not as quickly as I did when I was in my 20s and 30s and whatnot, but I walk quickly, and I don't. I've never been one, with one brief exception, to really feel my way around and move around tentatively. As a result, with wine glasses can be fairly short-lived in the house, because
And
my
I've
wife.
I've gone to stainless steel wine glasses because I've just broken way too
Oh,
many, and
I
gone to
love them.
stainless
Yep.
steel, and it just like, you know what, it just, I knock it over. All right, the wine is to clean up, but the glass is still intact. There's not 1,000 shards on the porcelain floor. So
Yeah. After 30
the
years of marriage, my wife still has not completely acclimated to the idea of not leaving half-filled glasses of liquid on, just anywhere on the counter or on that table. Yeah, it just uh,
uh,
that's life,
oh, of
and
course,
yeah,
of course. You brought
yeah.
up a couple of things there, though. I think that it's interesting. Like you said, your Toastmaster speech, and talking about how your parents had to make you do chores, and otherwise you couldn't sit at the dinner table. I mean, nowadays I do the same thing with my kids. They're 8, 9, and 10, and but it's otherwise they don't get their iPad time, right? Their screen time. But I remember reading something, and I want to say it was like an Inc. magazine article, or it might have been part of a TED talk, or maybe I'm combining two things into one here. But there's two things that stand out. One was the kids who do chores when they're young, as well as kids who you don't overprotect. Let them fall off their bikes and get bumps and bruises. And I mean, I wouldn't let them play in traffic, but just the little bumps and bruises of life. That those two things were strongly correlated with just autonomy and success later on in life. And maybe I'm botching some of that data, but those things, maybe these are things that have helped you. But I wanted to maybe shift gears and talk a little bit about fast forward a few years, because I think you're around age 11, around age 11, I think, from our last conversation. You said when you got introduced to the world of chess. So I thought maybe you could just tell that story a little bit.
Yes. I'd have to say the love of my life. And it was my 11th Christmas. I turned 11 in September. Christmas came. Of course, it was never soon enough. But and under the tree, I found two large flat boxes. One of them contained an adapted Scrabble board. And Scrabble had been something that we had played already. And our family we liked games, and for evening entertainment. We did watch some TV, but we liked to play games, board games and whatnot. And Scrabble was one of our favorites. And up to that point, I had learned print before I lost my vision, and the etched letters on the Scrabble tiles, I could feel them and recognize them. So that's how I knew what letters I had in my hand, and I just basically was trying to remember as best I could what was on the Scrabble board, and I'd figure out my word and usually give the letters to my mom or whoever was handy to put them on the board without disarraying everything, because just standard board. Anyway, so one of them was Scrabble board, and the other one was this board, looked like a checkerboard. And I was familiar with checkers, adapted checkerboards, where the squares are indented where the checkers go. Well, the chessboard turned out to be, and it looked very similar to that. It was wood, had raised and lowered squares in an alternating pattern, just like a checkerboard. And this box full of all these fascinating shaped pieces. And I make the detail because nobody in my family knew a thing about chess. I have created a scenario many years later to try to figure out how my parents happened to come up with a chessboard. They would have had to order it special from whatever. I think it was American Printing House, American Foundation, where the existing ones, Clover Nook, those were the places where you got adapted things, games, mobility aids, etc. Back then, again, it was around 1961. But the school, as it happened, I was in 7th grade, and the school had apparently been contacted by someone from the Indianapolis Chess Club who had volunteered to come out to the school and give chess lessons to kids who wanted them. So every Tuesday evening for, it was probably an hour and a half, something like that, he would show up, and those of us interested would show up with our chessboards. I speculate that maybe the school had contacted Mom and mentioned a chessboard as a possible Christmas present because this development was in the works. I have no idea, but for whatever reason, they got me the chessboard, and it just happened coincidentally that through the winter and spring that followed that Christmas, a fellow named Norbert Matthews came out to the school and taught us to play. He actually took us to a junior tournament. I think it was at one of the schools in Indianapolis. So I actually played against a couple of my opponents were sighted players. We wound up playing each other, the three of us from the school who went to the tournament. So one game I lost was to one of the other kid who was from our school, a fellow named Steven Spiker. I lost to him. I beat Jimmy Ballard, who was the other kid of the three of us who went to the school. And then I had wound up with 3 wins and 2 losses overall. So the other games, I had, I beat a sighted kid and lost to one. So it was that got me started, and it's been I've played now tournament chess off and on pretty much since then. I played my first adult tournament in 1974. 73 or 74, and have played tournaments, many mainstream tournaments, and have played in there's the one National Blind Championship tournament that happens each year, and I've played in probably, I think, maybe 6 or 8 of those over the years. Actually, probably a couple more than that even.
Well, you won 3 of them, right?
I've won 3. I have 3 wins in 2 seconds.
There you go.
I guess the main thing that I've gotten from that, chess is an amazing game. if you're going to study chess, you're going to learn about organizing and prioritizing. Um, you're going to learn about concentrating. Um, you are going to develop either some tactile dexterity. You know, the board is made so that each piece has a peg in the bottom, and each square has a hole drilled in the center, which on the better made sets fits pretty snugly the peg from each of the pieces. So you can feel the board, feel the pieces. You learn to recognize the relationship of the pieces. You follow the diagonal lines and the straight lines of the squares. It's an 8x8 board, 8 squares wide, 8 squares long, so 64 squares total. The black squares are raised, the white squares are lower. So you learn to, by touch, recognize the difference, follow those diagonals, and you have to be fairly dexterous with your hands, because even though the pieces fit on the good sets fairly snugly, you can still knock them over. And so you learn that dexterity. Um, the chess is called the game of kings, and there are many stories that tell about this emperor, that king. Um, there's one recount that in World War II, apparently one of our generals was a chess player, and because of that, he wound up gaining an ally from a tribe. I don't know if it was in the Philippines or somewhere in the Pacific, and actually gained an ally because of his relationship over the chessboard with one of the leaders in the wherever it was he was. I'm not remembering the details. I apologize. But for a blind player, also, it really helps if you can learn to visualize the board, to be able to view, if I can use that word, the position in your head without the benefit of a board. Many of the more highly skilled blind players throughout the world do not, they'll play, and if they use a board at all, it might be just for some reference as they're reminding themselves of a position or something, but they're calculating, they're analyzing in their heads without feeling the board. We actually have a tournament, at least one every year these days, using Skype, where we are required to play without a board. You cannot have a board anywhere near in front of you. If you have one, you're disqualified.
That must take, an insane amount of concentration to, chess is not exactly a game that moves along quickly unless you're playing against me, I guess. It might be like a 3 or 4 moves and it's over. But when you're having skilled chess players playing against each other, and these could be quite long games, it must take an immense amount of focus, concentration, and I don't know, the visual memory of some sort to remember positions on the board all the time. Like, is there something? I don't know. How do you train for that? You just do, I guess.
The games are actually timed. So, and there are people, anybody who was, paying attention to the world of chess last year before, the world championship was happening. A fellow named Magnus Carlsen, was from, I believe, Norway or Denmark, somewhere over in the Scandinavians, was playing against an American, a guy named Caruana, and they drew all of their games. and they were playing with probably 3 minutes per move. Basically, the way it usually works is you're giving a set amount of time. For example, our blind national championship, you have 2 hours and 15 minutes on your clock, and your opponent has 2 hours and 15 minutes on his clock or her clock. And you can take 20 minutes on a move if you're so inclined, or you can make your move in 5 seconds if you're comfortable enough to do it. But the gamut of timing protocols, it's called blitz, and you have 5 minutes on your clock and 5 minutes on your opponent's clock. So, I mean, the noise of one of those games is kind of intriguing, because you hear bang, snap, bang, snap, bang, snap, as each player slams the piece down onto the board and smacks the clock to stop his clock and start the opponent's clock. The more sane time controls, the 2 time controls that we use most commonly, you have 60 minutes to make 30 moves, and your opponent has 60 minutes also. And when you complete your 30th move, you get an additional hour added to your clock. And that continues to repeat if the game happens to go more than 60 moves, which they occasionally do. You'll get yet another hour. The other time control that we use a lot is you have an hour and 45 minutes to play the entire game. Each player has an hour and 45 minutes on their respective clock. And just to fill in a small gap, if you've never seen a chess clock, it is a 2-faced clock, and there is a button which will start or stop the time on each clock. So at no point are both clocks running at the same time. When the player who is playing the white pieces moves first, the protocol that has lived for the 8,000 years or thereabouts that a game like chess has existed. So when the game is ready to start, the player of the black pieces presses the button that starts white's clock. As soon as the player of the white pieces makes his or her move, then he or she presses the button that stops that clock and starts the other player's clock. So you can finish a game in fairly short order. We usually figure a game is going to take 2 hours anyway. So yeah, that is intense concentration for that amount of, for the time that you're playing. One famous story back in the early 70s, 1972, the whole world went crazy on chess because there was this American named Bobby Fischer, who was just this incredibly brilliant chess player. The Soviets had dominated the chess world for decades. The current world champion was a fellow named Boris Spassky, and Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky were going to play their world championship match. They would play the first player to earn 12 points. You get a 1 point for a win, a half a point if the game is drawn. Nobody wins, nobody loses. Of course, you don't get any points if you lose. During that match, went on for a good couple weeks, it was reported that Boris Spassky actually lost 40 pounds during that chess match.
Well, Bobby Fischer caused him a lot of stress, if I'm not mistaken. Didn't he show up late and forfeit games and stuff like this just to get inside his psyche and drive this guy crazy? They said that's the same story. Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
It's a mental game too, right? And it was pure. it was all out mental warfare that was happening there, right? So, no, I think it's That's now. Can you just elaborate a little bit on, like, you're talking about the clocks, and you talked about the boards a little bit, but am I mistaken, or is it normally when you're playing as a blind chess competitor, each player has their own board, and how does that work?
That's right. Yeah. When I go to a tournament, of course, when we're playing on Skype, but just almost any scenario, unless you're just sitting casually with a neighbor playing a game of chess, and sometimes even then, each player uses a separate board. One reason for that is in the mainstream world, if you touch a piece, you move it, and you're allowed one move at each turn. So you can't make a move and then make another move because you touch another piece. But basically, a sighted player, so you have to be a little bit careful because the boards are not huge. They're somewhere between 8 and 13 or 14 inches on a side. So you can kind of extrapolate from that how big each square is, and the pieces generally are maybe 4 inches tall or less. So you have to be a little bit coordinated to make sure you touch the right piece. Otherwise, you touch the wrong piece, you have to move it. Whether it's a good move, as long as it's a legal move, you have to find a legal move to make with that touched piece. Well, for a blind player, that would pose some slant to the playing field. So the rule is, if you willfully remove a piece from the square, it is considered touched, and you have to, if there is a legal move that you can make with that piece, if there are more than one, you can choose the one you want to make, but you have to make a move with the piece that you've taken off the chessboard. And so you going back to the dexterity, to the ability to be fairly light-fingered, touching the board. I was playing a game one time with a fellow who was rated above me, and I had him in what's called a mating net, meaning that each move I was forcing him to move his king or block, because when you make a move and you put the other guy in, it's called in check, meaning you're attacking his king. He has to first and foremost must get his king out of check. If he can't do it, the game is over and he's lost. So I have this mating net, and I'm almost out of time. I'm literally down to a minute left on my clock, and I had probably 8, 10, 12 moves or so that I had to make. So I'm moving as quickly as I can, and there's one point where I could, if I moved my queen to a particular square, he would not be in check, but he wouldn't have a legal move on the board, and that would be a draw. And this is a game that I just, it was a one game. I just had to complete the moves to checkmate him. Well, I had already taken my queen off the square, and as I was almost placing it on the square that would have created the stalemate. He would not have had a legal move on the board, but he would not have been in check. And I just let the queen fly out of my hand, and it went to after one of the fellows who was watching the game got up and went over and picked it up off the floor and brought it back. And it gave me that few seconds of time to catch my mistake, and I had taken the queen off the board, so I had to move her. But there was the right move, and then there was the wrong move, and this gave me the opportunity to refocus to get the right square, because once you make the move, you can't take it back. There's protocol when we're playing on Skype, since you're not in the same room. You say the move, and I do this when I'm playing in a tournament as well, a mainstream tournament, across the table from my opponent. I say the move, I move it on my board, and then I hit his clock. He makes his move. The protocol is he makes his move. He says it out loud, so I know what the move is, and then he presses the clock to start my time. So you're speaking the moves back and forth, and that's how we communicate the moves.
What does that look like? What do you say when you? I guess I don't know the terminology on a chessboard for when you're speaking the move.
The current method, it's called the Algebraic System, has nothing to do with algebra at all. Although one of my students was so upset by the fact that it was called the Algebraic System, she declined to even bother to deal with it. But anyway, it's the Algebraic System. Each square has a letter and a number associated with it. And I mentioned the board was eight squares wide. So the row of squares, each row of squares leading from say the white's side of the board to black's side of the board is lettered. So you have the A, the B, the C, the D, the E, the F, the G, and the H files. And then each row, again, starting from the white side of the board, is numbered. So the square on the left-hand side of the board, on the very first row nearest to the white's side of the board, that square is A1. So basically, each of the 64 squares has a unique address, we'll call it. There's only one board on the square, which is A1. There's only one board on the square, which is H8. And they are, if you can picture it, on opposing diagonally across the board from white's lower left hand. From white's perspective, the player of the black pieces is sitting opposite. You're facing each other. So his left hand is my right hand if I'm on the white side. My left hand is his right hand. And any blind player, any blind person who has received directions from a sighted person has dealt with this concept. Okay, so somebody is giving you direction and they're facing you and they tell you to turn right and it's actually your left. So this is not something that's new to blind players. But so anyway, each square is labeled. So I'm moving my knight, let's say, and it's going to the square labeled F3. And especially when we're playing using Skype, just because the language may be a barrier or the connection may be not entirely clear, we use the alliterations, either the military or the European. So it'll sound like knight to Felix 3 or knight to Foxtrot 3. And both players understand precisely which knight is being moved and the square that is being moved to. And it can happen, certain of the pieces, either of your two knights, either of your two rooks could possibly move to the same square. And so we distinguish knight from Bravo to Delta 2. And that makes sense to at least to another chess player.
No, I guess that logically makes sense to me. Trying to keep a mental map of everything sounds like it might be challenging. But I was wondering if you could just briefly comment on, you mentioned Skype, you mentioned coaching. You are a coach as well as a player. Can you maybe just discuss how technology has I guess, changed the game of chess for blind or visually impaired players, either in the playing side, on the coaching side, etc.?
Sure. I mentioned that I started playing competitively back in the early 70s. And there is this organization in the United States called the United States Blind Chess Association. It used to be the United States Braille Chess Association, and some people took exception when we changed it from Braille to blind. But all too often, I was having new students who are blind telling me that they would like to learn chess, but they didn't know Braille. And in point of actual fact, you do not need to know Braille to play chess. So we decided that it just made more sense to change it from U.S. Braille to U.S. Blind Chess Association. So we had organized tournaments that we would play each other by mail. The U.S. Chess Federation, which is the mainstream national organization, has a correspondence segment. Generally, it's called the Golden Knights. So sighted people play correspondence chess as well, mailing their moves back and forth. In those days, this is pre-internet, and in fact, it was pre-PC. We sent brailled postcards to each other, or if we weren't Braille users, we sent tape recordings, cassettes back and forth to each other with our moves. So you can imagine, it could be 3 or 4 days. You'd make your move, write it on a card or record it on a tape, send it off to your opponent. He gets it 3, 4, 5, 6 days later, makes his move, hopefully fairly promptly, sends it back. So it could be a week or more between times making a move. In each correspondence tournament that was going on, the tournament was scheduled to last for 2 years, and you might have 20, 25 players. So you're playing a game against each one of those players, and you're maintaining a card file of all of the moves from each of those players. If your organization skills were good, you had a separate little slot for each player, and you kept all his cards in that slot. So, because unless you had 20 or 25 chessboards and the room to set them all up and leave them set up, it meant that you set up the board for a particular game, made the moves up to the current point, made your move, wrote it down, sent it off in the mail, and then grabbed the next envelope and reset the board for that game. That was in 1970s, 1980s, even into the 1990s. And then email came along, and an email game now will generally last maybe a month. Maybe a little more, sometimes less, depending on how quickly each player moves. I'm in it. The USBCA runs a correspondence tournament every year. Each month you start your subsequent round, your subsequent game against another player. You play one player at a time. You may have a game still going on when the next one starts, but that just means you have to do a similar kind of drill like I described. But basically, you have maybe 24 hours to get your move emailed over to your opponent, and you go by the timestamp of the move. And then there's Skype. Skype allows you to basically make a voice connection similar to Zoom, with or without video. And to most anywhere in the world, if they have internet and Skype capability, since 2014, when I retired from my real job and got back into playing chess very actively. Since that time, I have played chess, and I believe the count is somewhere around 25, 26 different countries. And I have trained myself. I can now play a game of chess in German, French, and Spanish, and I'm getting there with Italian. Um, so
That's impressive.
it's
That's
and
uh,
it's it has introduced me to, obviously I'm talking to these people. Sometimes it's the only communication is have a good game and you make the moves and you played well. Thanks for a good game. But oftentimes there's a lot more communication than that. So I've gotten to know fairly well people in a host of different countries. And in fact, in 2018, one of the high points of my career was my wife and I went to France, went to Bordeaux, France, and I played in the French Blind National Championship. I placed ninth overall, but I won the title of best unrated because it was my first what we call FIDE, FIDE. That is I mentioned there was the U.S. Chess Federation. That's the United States mainstream chess governing body. I forgot what FIDE stands for, but it is the worldwide governing body of chess, not just for blind, but for everybody.
probably like
Uh,
Fédération Internationale de something.
mm-hmm.
Aveugle would be blind in French. I speak French also. It's
Fédération
very,
Nationale de something,
yeah,
or something like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm. Interesting. No, that's interesting. I don't want to take all of your time, but I do want to touch on one other topic here, which brings us far away from chess and underwater. I think you also have another claim to fame, and maybe you can discuss that a little bit and how that came to be.
That, and I'm going to take a liberty here because the other question I know we're going to touch on is my calling, and so yes, underwater scuba diving. I am, to the best of my knowledge, and I have done a fair bit of checking. To my knowledge, I am the first totally blind person in the United States, or I was at that time, to be certified as a scuba diver. I was trained by the sons of the photographer, one of the photographers who actually traveled with Jacques Cousteau, name most people recognize, whether they know much else about oceans and diving and what have you. But Jim Stewart's sons, Flip and Terry, I'm sorry, Jim Nicklin's sons, Jim Stewart's favorite actor anyway. Jim Nicklin's sons, Flip and Terry, owned a dive shop in San Diego where I had gone for graduate school. And thanks to the phys ed director at University of California, San Diego campus, where I was a grad student, he introduced me to skin diving and introduced me to Flip and Terry Nickland. Sea Hunt was one of my favorite TV shows when I was of that age, back in the late 50s, early 60s. It was hard to follow because so much was done underwater, and of course there's no dialogue going on then. But just the sound of his breathing underwater and the bubbles from his air tank, and it just, I'm living in Indiana. I'm 1,000 miles and more from the nearest saltwater, but I fell in love with the ocean. And when grad school came and I got to move to go to San Diego and live there, wound up living there for 7 years. And 1973, I was certified as a scuba diver, first totally blind. And it was just one in a series of, I've lived my life, and my primary intent has been to make people see me not as a blind man, but as a man who, among other things, happens to be blind. And most sighted people that I meet, and so many of the blind people that I meet, the overriding dominant descriptor that they think of for themselves and for the sighted person who sees me is blind. And it frequently takes work to get them to see anything else. I've run into it in chess, living in Seattle when I lived up in Seattle in the early 80s and played a lot of tournaments. And if I happened to win a game at a tournament, more than once I heard the tournament director make a comment, "Well, George, I guess he saw more than you did, didn't he?" And
That's, I don't know if I should laugh or not at that, right? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
it, but it's been my that's been my goal, is to make people see me as a man who happens to be, among other things, blind. Also
I think that
happen to
leads
have,
into your calling a little bit, right? Like, we were trying to
yeah,
talk about your calling.
that's
I don't
right.
know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit, because it doesn't just apply. Like, my impression from our earlier conversation a few weeks back is that this mindset doesn't just apply to you, that how you want others, generally speaking, to be looking at people who are blind, that they happen to be blind, but they might also happen to be a man or a woman or large or skinny or whatever else. I mean, it is an attribute, but it is not the defining attribute of their entire being, right?
That's right. And one of the things in going through school, the first half of elementary school, I went to the Indiana School for the Blind. But as I mentioned, I was 150 miles away from home. I had my 6th birthday in Indianapolis. My parents lived up in the northwest corner of the state, and so as I was at least 6 weeks period, one grading period into 4th grade, they engineered a switch and transferred me to, it was a Catholic school for 4th grade and then a public school for 5th and 6th grades, so that I could be at home going to school. 7th grade, it's worth mentioning that at that time, and again, it was 1961, the school, basically the Portage Junior High school principal said, yeah, I could go to the school, but it wouldn't be, he didn't think it would be safe for me to take part in any of the extracurriculars. So we talked about it and decided that my uncle had been on the wrestling team. Both my aunt and uncle had been in the band. Decided that it was time to go back to the Indiana School for the Blind. I wrestled 5 of the 6 years. Was in the band, in the chorus for 1 year anyway, for the chorus. I wasn't a great singer. Which is
you're
better
at throwing people around on a mat then, right? So,
yeah, but if you're blind, you're supposed to be really good in music. That's just one of those things. Blind people have this innate ability with music. We're also very insightful. Anyway, never mind that.
I didn't get the musical talents, Jim. I'm going to be honest with you. They throwing people around on a mat. Maybe I did a little bit of that before. So I don't know if you know, but so Bruno Fernandez, who usually co-hosts these episodes with me, who is an ophthalmologist, and we talked earlier that he wouldn't be able to join us, unfortunately, today. Mm-hmm. But so he's an ophthalmologist by training. He also is a world champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and runs a series of schools. And I trained at his gym for a little while, and being visually impaired, it didn't, it didn't give me, I was on the level playing field as everybody else, because in that sport, wrestling as well, but probably jiu-jitsu probably even more, you're in contact with your opponent, and it's a lot of just proprioception. You can almost close your eyes and still fight once you've got a hold of somebody, right? So yeah. I had some of those skills too with you, probably similar to you, but the idea of music, unfortunately, I got the short end of the genetic lottery there as well.
but later on, this would have been, let me see, I was in New York at the time. I was in New York from 82 to 87. And for 3 of those years, I was lead instructor for a pilot program. We were trying to incorporate this newfangled creation called a personal computer. We were trying to find the ways that computer was going to help break down the print barrier and could be used as a vehicle by which blind people could enter into the job market. One of my students, a young lady named Kathy, also totally blind, and she had another and probably even more challenging attribute, and that was she was I believe she was like 4 feet 8 inches tall. So she was challenged trying to reach things that many people take for granted. But anyway, she decided, because of my stories, to get herself certified as a scuba diver, and she did it. I've not been in touch with her for, well, basically pretty much since she completed the courses I was teaching. But that to me it figured into what I feel like is my calling, and the other part of that is in 1973 when I started playing tournaments. The reason I started playing tournaments was my contact with a fellow that I had met at the chess club there in San Diego, and he took me under his wing. He was a rated expert chess player. He took me under his wing. He started reading things on the tape for me. I was still too young and stupid to know about real effective studying. I thought I could study an opening just simply by playing it a couple times. I've finally begun to learn that is not the case. But he touched my life in many ways. Don Philly, if I'd love it if he should ever happen to come across this, because I've lost track of him. He's getting close to 80. I'd love to talk to him again. But anyway, he was my mentor in chess for the time that I was in San Diego. And being able to play tournament chess, and since I've retired, and being able to actually pay that forward to other blind players. The players that I coach typically are the brand new players. They're still struggling to get their feet under them, so to speak, with respect to playing the game. And it's something that I would do. Well, in fact, I've I battled my wife's plans for my time. I got the opportunity to actually teach chess for Hadley Institute for 3 years, and then they disbanded their chess program. So I've continued my coaching. I run something. I try to get there every Saturday. I've missed a lot of Saturdays, certainly through this summer, but every Saturday morning on Skype, I have a 2-hour gathering called Chess Gather. And any player, blind or sighted as far as that goes, who wants to sit in, and we'll talk over a game. We'll play through a game that somebody has played. And I try to put into layman's terms the things that I've been able to gather about how to try to play a well-planned, well-organized, well-executed game. And so being able to pay that forward, to teach others to play chess, hopefully maybe well, one young man right now, he's 13, in San Diego, as a matter of fact, just coincidentally. But I think he's been thoroughly bitten by the bug, and I feel fairly confident that there's a good chance that he will be a presence in the chess world for the next, well, hopefully 60, 70, 80 years, 90, say he's 13. So, and I was instrumental at getting a 10-year-old from the Southeast in Florida to come to our national tournament. This would have been in 2019. The youngest player ever to attend the U.S. Blind National Championship. So that was, it's things like this, especially where I can get a young person interested in and actively playing, willing to go to, excuse me, to a mainstream tournament. Skype allows blind players now to play a lot of chess any time of the day or night against whoever they want to, and many of them play a lot, mostly with other blind players. But there are also websites out there where you can compete with just anybody, and nobody will know if you're blind or sighted or what. Because you're connecting through a computer interface. Just you type your move on the keyboard and hit enter, and that shows up on your opponent's screen, and he or she does the same. So you could be playing against somebody who's 6 or 89, male or female, on any of the well, probably 6 of the 7 continents. I don't know if there are any chess players on Antarctica, but there could be. A few more years of global warming, there probably will be.
Well, we're all going to be starting to set up shop, eh? So
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful how you've really paid it forward, like you said, and encouraging young people and just getting into coaching in general and stuff. So it might be a good point to wrap up here. I'm sure there's a lot more stories and stuff we can dive into, and maybe we can circle back and come back for another episode in the future. But if there's any, do you have any parting words of wisdom for any young people or maybe dealing with visual impairments, or parents of kids that might be dealing with visual impairments, or even adults, in terms of whether it's chess, whether it's life advice, etc. And if you had to kind of sum those up in some parting words, what would you want to say?
I would, for parents of a blind child, absolutely, I would say, please swallow your fears for your child. Let them run, because if you don't, it will cripple them later in ways you can't even imagine. And for the blind, visually impaired, the people who are dealing with losing vision, the people who've already lost it, recognize that when you interact with somebody, they're going to want to do for you, or they're going to want to avoid you, because there is an incredible fear of blindness out there. And there is an incredible level of non-understanding, even ignorance, with respect to how blindness affects your life. And people don't believe me when I say I'm actually relatively glad that I lost my vision when I did, because if I hadn't, I have no idea what my life track would have been. Maybe I'd want to play in Major League Baseball. I love baseball. Maybe I would have been in the military. Maybe I would have been buried in Vietnam. Who knows? But because of the track that the good Lord put me on back when I was 5 years old, and because of the fact that my parents were not, well, if they were terrified, they swallowed it. And they let me run. They let me climb. They let me fall. And were there when I needed them, or to look after bruises, or to give me some encouragement, to make sure that I enrolled in college, and was the first person in either side of the family to attend college. Just let them, and recognize that when people see you, chances are they're going to see the blind first. It's up to you to make sure that they see the person ultimately. And if you can do that, then you can contribute, whether it's directly or not, you can contribute to making life better for other blind people coming along afterward. And that's what I hope I have done and will continue to do while I'm able. And I just appreciate the fact that things have collided so that I was able to be here today and have Sean to interview and to help me get the word out.
Well, listen, Jim, this is my pleasure, truly. I've talked to you before about the impetus behind the podcast, and really that is, just to do this, to showcase, research, talk to doctors, ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. And you're certainly, among that group, although I think you might have some extraordinary abilities when you're talking about these memories from your really early childhood, and the ability to memorize chessboards positions for hours on end and stuff. So there's probably some extraordinary abilities there, but or ordinary abilities that have been honed over time. But I think that just showcasing your life and your stories and accomplishments, not just in chess, but in scuba diving and elsewhere. I think that that alone is going to just have people who are listening to this hopefully understand that even these things are possible. Because I'm going to be honest, when Bruno said, "Hey, we have U.S. blind chess champion going to be in the podcast," I'm like, a blind chess champion? I'm like, how does that even work? So I was amazed, but talking to you, like, okay, it's like this makes sense how someone can do this. So it's I think just getting the word out and can help break down those mental barriers for people who are sighted or visually impaired alike, right? So I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your stories.
One last thing, if I may.
Of course, yes.
And I'm happy that I was able to win the tournament the 3 times that I won it. I stress that I'm not the best blind player in the country by a long shot, but I was the best who showed up. And those last 3 words, I think, are words that I would love to have people, blindsided or otherwise, incorporate deeply into their own what we call the Weltanschauung, the world's perspective, their life view. Because if you don't play, you can't win. And if you don't show up, you're not going to have any impact.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of people are so afraid of losing that you can just never, in anything in life, they're so afraid of losing that they just don't even play, right? So, no, I think that's definitely some good, some sage advice. So, Jim, thanks for doing this today. It's certainly been a pleasure. I feel like you and I could sit and talk for hours on end, and maybe at some point in time we could, do a round 2 in person. And if not, I'd still love to meet you face to face and, over a coffee and carry on a conversation.
Absolutely. Who knows what it'll bring, but I plan to be here until I'm at least 140 or 150. So I wouldn't put it off, but I'm going to say we have time. It tends to mean you put it off, but yeah, anytime.
Excellent.
Anytime.
Thanks, Jim, so much. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
And that concludes today's episode of the Broad Eye Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Of course, ratings and reviews are always welcome. And you can certainly share this episode with any of your colleagues or friends who might enjoy it. Thanks for listening.